July 12th, 1979, 2:45 p.m., Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant, 205 Knickerbocker Avenue, Bushwick, Brooklyn. Carmine Galante sat in the outdoor garden patio, finishing lunch with his cousin Giuseppe Turano and associate Leonard Coppola. The 69-year-old boss of the Bonanno crime family lit his signature cigar, the one that had earned him the nickname the Cigar. His two bodyguards, Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato, stood nearby. Three men in ski masks burst through the restaurant. They ran into the garden. Shotgun blasts and automatic pistol fire erupted. Galante was hit in the chest and left eye. He was blown backward out of his chair, crashing into a small tomato patch behind the patio. Giuseppe Turano and Leonard Coppola died beside him. The gunmen fled. When police arrived, they found Carmine Galante lying on his back, blood pooling beneath him, his cigar still clenched between his teeth. The photograph would appear on newspaper front pages around the world. The most feared mob boss in America, executed in broad daylight at his cousin's restaurant, shot by men sent by the Commission, the Mafia's ruling body, betrayed by his own bodyguards, who stood by and watched him die. Before we dive into this story, if you're enjoying these deep dives into Mafia history, hit that like button and subscribe. We drop a new documentary every week. And drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. New York, Italy, somewhere else? We love hearing from you. Now, let's get into it. This is the true story of Carmine Galante, the psychopathic mobster who tried to become boss of bosses and paid for it with his life. A man so violent that prison psychiatrists diagnosed him with a mental age of 14 and an IQ of 90, an enforcer who carried out over 80 murders and never showed remorse, and a drug lord whose greed and paranoia turned the entire commission against him, leading to one of the most famous mob hits in American history. But here's what makes this story different. Galante wasn't killed by rivals from another family. He was killed by his own organization. The commission, including retired Bonanno boss Joe Bonanno himself, approved the hit. His own family's capos coordinated it, and his personal bodyguards sold him out. Because Carmine Galante had broken the most fundamental rule of the Mafia, he'd tried to take too much power, and in doing so, he signed his own death warrant. Camillo Carmine Galante was born February 21st, 1910, in a tenement building in East Harlem, Manhattan. His parents, Vincenzo James Galante and Vincenza Russo, had emigrated from Castellammare del Golfo, Sicily, to New York City in 1906. Vincenzo worked as a fisherman. They settled in East Harlem, one of New York's toughest Italian immigrant neighborhoods. Carmine had two brothers, Samuel and Peter Galante, and two sisters, Josephine and Angelina. By age 10, he was already causing serious trouble. He was sent to reform school for his criminal activities. He soon formed a juvenile street gang on New York's Lower East Side. By age 15, Galante had dropped out of school after 7th grade. On December 12, 1925, the 15-year-old Galante pleaded guilty to assault charges. On December 22, 1926, he was sentenced to at least 2.5 years in state prison. He was barely 16 years old. In August 1930, Galante was arrested for the murder of police officer Walter de Castilla during a payroll robbery. However, he was never indicted. Also in 1930, NYPD officer Joseph Minahan caught Galante and other gang members attempting to hijack a truck in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. In the ensuing gun battle, Galante wounded Minahan and a 6-year-old bystander. Both survived. On February 8, 1931, after pleading guilty to attempted robbery, Galante was sentenced to 12.5 years in state prison. He was 20 years old. While imprisoned in 1931, doctors diagnosed Galante as having a psychopathic personality. They determined he had a mental age of 14 and an IQ of 90. These psychological evaluations described him as dangerous, impulsive, and incapable of feeling remorse. On May 1, 1939, Galante was released from prison on parole. By 1940, he was carrying out murders for Vito Genovese, the underboss of the Luciano crime family. Galante developed an underworld reputation for viciousness. The NYPD suspected him of involvement in over 80 murders throughout his career. In 1943, Galante allegedly murdered Carlo Tresca, the publisher of an anti-fascist newspaper in New York. Vito Genovese, living in exile in Italy, had offered to kill Tresca as a favor to Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini. Galante was arrested but never convicted. On February 10, 1945, Galante married Helen Marulli. They had 3 children, James Galante, Camille Galante, and Angela Galante. They later separated but never divorced. Galante would later state that he never divorced her because he was a good Catholic. Despite this claim, he lived for 20 years with a mistress, Anne Aquavella, who bore 2 of his 5 children. By 1953, Carmine Galante had risen to become the Bonanno family's underboss Joseph Bonanno. It was during this time that he was dubbed the Cigar, or Lilo, Sicilian slang for cigar. He was rarely seen without one clenched between his teeth. Galante's value to the Bonanno operation was in drug trafficking, particularly heroin. He spoke various Italian dialects and was fluent in Spanish and French. This linguistic ability made him invaluable for international drug operations. Joseph Bonanno sent him to Montreal, Canada, to oversee the family's heroin business, smuggling so-called French connection heroin from France through Canada into the United States. Galante ran the Montreal operation for years, generating massive profits. But in 1957, Canadian authorities had enough. They deported him back to the United States. On October 14, 1957, Galante attended the infamous Appalachian meeting in upstate New York, where over 60 mob bosses from across the country gathered. Police raided the meeting, exposing organized crime's national structure. The publicity triggered massive federal scrutiny. In 1958 and 1960, Galante was indicted for drug trafficking. In 1962, he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He was sent to the federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. While Galante sat in prison, the Bonanno family descended into chaos. Joseph Bonanno attempted to consolidate power across all 5 families, triggering what became known as the Bonanno War. Without Galante as his top enforcer, Bonanno's plans collapsed. The commission forced Bonanno into retirement in 1968. Philip "Rusty" Rastelli was installed as the new official boss. Galante was paroled in 1974 after serving 12 years. The day he walked free from federal lockup in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, he sent a message. He ordered the tombstone of one-time New York Mafia chief Frank Costello blown to pieces by dynamite. It was a declaration. Carmine Galante was back, and he was taking over. The commission had appointed Philip Rastelli as boss of the Bonannos. Galante ignored Rastelli's appointment and named himself the new Don. When Rastelli went to prison on extortion charges, Galante seized complete control of the family. He surrounded himself with a crew of young imported Sicilian drug pushers called Zips for protection. These were tough, ruthless enforcers from Sicily who owed loyalty only to Galante. Galante rebuilt the family's heroin empire. He used his Sicilian connections to import massive quantities of heroin through Montreal and distribute it across the United States. The profits were staggering. But Galante wasn't satisfied with controlling just the Bonanno family's drug business. He wanted it all. During the late 1970s, Galante allegedly organized the murders of at least 8 members of the Gambino family, with whom he had an intense rivalry. He was trying to take over their narcotics operations. He began muscling in on other families' drug territories, demanding tribute, eliminating anyone who refused to cooperate. Galante declared himself capo di tutti I capis, boss of bosses. This was an arrogant claim that hadn't been made since the days of Lucky Luciano. The other families were alarmed and furious. Who did this guy think he was? The commission existed precisely to prevent any one boss from becoming too powerful. Galante was violating every rule. On March 3, 1978, Galante's parole was revoked by the United States Parole Commission for allegedly associating with other Bonanno mobsters. He was sent back to prison. However, on February 27, 1979, a judge ruled that the government had illegally revoked Galante's parole and ordered his immediate release. Galante walked free again and immediately resumed his power grab. He continued expanding his drug empire. He continued eliminating rivals. He continued acting like he owned New York. The New York crime families were alarmed. Genevieve's crime family boss, Frank Thierry, began contacting Cosa Nostra leaders to build a consensus for Galante's murder. Even Joseph Bonanno, the retired former boss who'd mentored Galante, gave his approval. When your own mentor agrees you need to die, you've crossed every possible line. In 1979, Philip Rastelli, the official boss still in prison, sought commission approval to kill Galante. The commission granted it. The contract was issued. Rastelli had his two top capos, Alphonse Sonny Red Indelicato and Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano, coordinate the details of the hit. First, they made a back-channel deal with Galante's inner circle, the Sicilian Zips from Knickerbocker Avenue. Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato, Galante's personal bodyguards, were offered promotion and a bigger piece of the family's drug rackets if they cooperated. Bonventre and Amato didn't hesitate. They sold out their boss. They agreed to set him up. About 1 p.m. on July 12, 1979, Bonventre and Amato accompanied Galante to lunch at Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant on Knickerbocker Avenue in Bushwick, Brooklyn. The restaurant was owned by Galante's cousin Giuseppe Turano, a soldier in the Bonanno family. According to testimony from John Turano, Giuseppe's son, someone called the restaurant earlier that day. The caller identified himself as Jimmy Galante, Carmine's nephew and driver. He asked if his uncle was there. John Turano later testified. Giuseppe Turano went to the garden patio to join Galante and Leonardo Coppola, a frequent companion of Galante. The men sat at a table in the outdoor garden behind the restaurant. It was a hot summer day, 87 degrees. They ate a meal of fish, salad, and wine. Galante lit his cigar. Around 2:45 p.m., 3 masked gunmen stormed into the restaurant. John Turano heard one of the intruders say, "In the back, Sally." The gunman entered the garden and opened fire. Shotgun blasts and automatic pistol fire erupted. Galante was hit in the chest by a shotgun blast that threw him backward. Bullets pierced his left eye and riddled his chest. Giuseppe Turano and Leonardo Coppola were also killed. Bonventre and Amato, Galante's bodyguards, did nothing. They stood by and watched their boss get executed. They were left completely unharmed. The gunmen fled. When police arrived, the scene was surreal. Carmine Galante lay on his back in the tomato patch, blood pooling beneath him. His cigar was still clenched between his teeth. Crime scene photos captured the moment. The New York Post ran a front-page photo of the grisly scene the next day. Galante's death, grimace, cigar in mouth, became an indelible part of Mafia lore. Giuseppe Turano and Leonardo Coppola lay dead beside him. The bodies were covered by a floral oilcloth from the table. Chalk marks indicated where slugs, casings, and impact points were found. It was a professional hit, executed with precision. When morgue attendants carried Galante's body out of Joe and Mary's, it passed beneath a sign reading, "We give special attention to outgoing orders." Photographers captured that irony too. The Catholic Archdiocese of New York refused to give Galante a burial mass. Invoking a rarely used bit of ecclesiastical law, the church apologized but stated, "We are not able to grant a liturgical service in the church because of the scandal that would ensue." It was a really big deal for practicing Catholics, even those who made their living killing on the black market. However, the associates slain alongside Galante, Turano, and Coppola were granted proper Catholic burials. The investigation moved quickly. Only one person was ever charged for the crime. Anthony Bruno Indelicato, a member of Galante's own Bonanno family and son of Capo Sonny Red Indelicato, was eventually convicted at the Mafia Commission trial in 1986. He served 19 years in prison. But everyone in law enforcement knew the truth. You don't hit a boss without approval, one federal source told reporters. We feel quite strongly that the decision was made here in New York. The commission had authorized the hit, multiple families had cooperated, and Galante's own bodyguards had sold him out. The murder had a domino effect. The Galante murder really opened and accelerated federal efforts to go after this heroin smuggling ring, explained Jeff Schumacher, senior director of content at the Mob Museum. Ultimately, a couple of years later, it led to a mass of arrests of individuals involved in the heroin ring. The hit also destabilized the Bonanno family for years. Without Galante's iron grip, factions emerged, power struggles erupted, the family descended into violence. Dominic Sonny Black, Napolitano, one of the capos who'd coordinated Galante's murder, was himself killed in 1981 after the Donnie Brasco FBI infiltration was exposed. Cesare Bonventre and Baldo Amato, the bodyguards who'd betrayed Galante, didn't live long to enjoy their rewards. Bonventre was murdered in 1984, his body found stuffed in 2 oil drums. Amato was killed in 1982. Betraying your boss might save you temporarily, but in the Mafia, betrayal is never truly forgiven. So, what does Carmine Galante's execution reveal about Mafia power? It shows that greed has limits. Galante controlled the Bonanno family's heroin empire. He was making millions, but he wanted more. He wanted to control all of New York's drug trade. He wanted to be boss of bosses. That ambition made him intolerable to the commission. The murder also demonstrates how the commission functions as a check on individual power. The Mafia isn't a dictatorship, it's a confederation of families governed by rules. When one boss becomes too powerful, too greedy, too disruptive, the commission acts. Galante's execution was strategic. It preserved the balance of power. But perhaps the most revealing aspect is the bodyguard betrayal. Bonventre and Amato were supposed to protect Galante with their lives. Instead, they stood by and watched him die. The commission bought their loyalty by offering them more money and power. It proves that in the Mafia, loyalty only goes as deep as the next best offer. Galante's famous arrogance contributed to his downfall. He was quoted saying, "No one will ever kill me, they wouldn't dare." That statement encapsulated his fatal flaw. He believed his reputation for violence made him untouchable. He thought his control of the heroin trade made him indispensable. He assumed nobody would dare challenge him. He was catastrophically wrong. The commission dared, and they succeeded. Today, Joe and Mary's Italian-American restaurant is gone. The building at 205 Knickerbocker Avenue has been shuttered for over 15 years. It's an empty retail unit. The neighborhood has changed. Boutique pet shops and trendy bars have replaced old mob hangouts. Bushwick gentrified. The Mafia's grip on the area weakened. But locals still remember. Bartenders at places like Three Diamond Door, just a few doors down from where Joe and Mary stood, hear the stories. "That's wild," one bartender told Fox 5 News when reminded of the history. The bloody demise of Carmine the Cigar Galante is part of the neighborhood's dark folklore. Carmine Galante's legacy is one of violence, greed, and overreach. He was a psychopathic killer who murdered over 80 people. He built a heroin empire that destroyed countless lives. He tried to become boss of bosses and paid for it with his life. The photograph of him lying dead with his cigar still in his mouth became iconic. It symbolizes the end of an era when mob bosses thought they were untouchable. Galante proved they weren't. The commission was stronger than any individual. And when you take too much, when you become too arrogant, when you threaten the entire system, the system eliminates you. If you found this story compelling, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment. Was the commission right to kill Galante? Or was this just another example of Mafia hypocrisy, where rules only apply when they're convenient? Let us know below.